Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about leadership with Richard Nugent. Richard, good to see you.
It's brilliant to be back with you, Dan.
Yeah, well, it's a delight to have you back. Really looking forward to talking all things leadership with you like we did last time. But this time, very exciting. We're going to be talking about your new book and its relationship with sports leadership. It's called The Alignment Advantage, and we're going to be going through that and unpacking that, as I say, with relation to sports leadership. Before we do that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Delighted to. So I'm the managing director of a company called 21 Leadership. The majority of the work we do is in the corporate world, but we also do work in football and in cricket. I've coached over the years a whole range of professional football, soccer players, cricketers, a few rugby players along the way, even a couple of professional wrestlers along the way, which is fascinating from a sports psychology perspective. I don't think I've told you that before, but God, what an interesting arena that is from a psychological point of view. We could spend the whole podcast just on that. The kind of clients I've worked with in the business world are people like Milne Entertainment, who are second to Disney in their field, Samsung, Warner Brothers Studios, and I also teach a couple of leadership and culture modules on the League Managers Association diploma in management, which is run for generally up-and-coming football managers. So over the years, I've worked with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Steve Holland, who's the assistant manager in England. I've trained the current Scotland men's and women's manager in soccer, and a whole range of other people over the years. So I'm really lucky. I've got my foot in both camps of corporate business world and also in sport as well.
Well, I was going to say, because you do most of your stuff now, as you said, in the corporate world, but you've got a really strong background in delivering in sport, haven't you? And I mean, with the League Managers Association, you've been doing that. Is that a couple of decades now, Richard?
Yeah, it does make me feel quite old. I think myself and Professor Sue Bridgewater, who kind of owns the course, if you like, and accredits it for the LMA. I think we worked out it was about 15 years we've been doing versions of that program, and I work with Becky and Ali, who are part of the LMA, to run master classes as well, and offshoots of that, I work with the Professional Cricketers Association. And you're right, that for me, that program is so great because it flips me on my head a little bit, in that I'm taking a sporting audience and introducing some business research and concepts and models to them. Whereas quite often with corporate clients, they want to know, how does this stuff look in sport and what do we do? Especially with managers and head coaches and management teams, when we've gone in and done culture programs, in sporting organizations or on with sports teams, they want to know what it looks like in that. So being able to do both is fascinating. There was a day last year, I think, where I'd done a really tough couple of days with a particular corporate client, and then I shot up to Scotland to work with the Swansea City squad and Russell Martin, who's the head coach up there, who I think is phenomenal. So being able to do that, as I say, it's a real privilege, and I really enjoy it.
You said something there that resonates with me from my own consultancy. The corporate world really want to know what sport is doing, and then sports coaches, managers, head coaches really want to learn from the corporate world, don't they? I mean, I even had one manager historically who when I asked him if he had come across my books before, he said, I don't read football books, and I only read books from business because I like to learn from the business world, which is completely fair enough. Clearly not fair enough that he hasn't purchased my book, but really fair enough that and I suppose that it's understandable that sport wants to learn from business and business wants to learn from sport.
Yeah, because I am at pains to say the environments are different. From most sport arenas to most business arenas. In terms of being in a dressing room or being in a locker room, it is not the same as being in a boardroom. Yeah. However, good psychological principles are good psychological principles in any performance environment, and good leadership principles are good leadership principles in any performance environment. And I think if I look at culture, I was really thinking about this as I was, preparing for this conversation. I think in sport, culture is becoming more prominent. I'm not saying that it's becoming more important, because in my view it always was, but I look at some of the things that are on Netflix, like Last Chance U. I don't know if you've watched the Last Chance U stuff on Netflix. Now, I've watched the basketball ones, but not the American football ones. I look at the culture that they're trying to create in those environments. I look at what Gareth Southgate's done with England is probably another really obvious example from the sport world. The prominence of culture is front and centre increasingly in sports. And while I think it has been part of the conversation in lots of businesses probably for longer, I think there are more obvious demarcations when it comes to culture in organizations where, Netflix are famous for the strength of their culture internally. And Disney's probably another obvious one, Nike, Apple, they're quite easy ones to pick out. That and the development of a culture in an organization and the principles of it are very similar to developing a culture in a locker room and also in a sporting organization.
You're using this word culture, and it's a word, as you're saying, we're using increasingly over the last couple of decades in sport. How do you define? I mean, you're dealing with certainly in the corporate world, but you talk to some of the world's leading managers, soccer, football managers, about this. On the League Managers Association course. How do you personally define culture?
Okay, my definition of culture is that culture is how we be around here. Now, okay. I know that's not very good English, and it's not just because I'm a northerner. So for people outside the UK, I'm from a place called Newcastle, which is the north of England.
Good football team right now.
Yeah, it's a good place to be from a soccer point of view at the moment, for sure. I'm actually out with one of the backroom staff tonight, so it'll be fascinating to see how things are there. So my favourite definition is that culture is how we be around here, because for me, culture is a combination of things. So it's a combination of how we show up for everybody every day in practice and, again, in the locker room, behind the scenes. But it's also what we demonstrate is important by the decisions that we make and the actions that we take. It also combines what we demonstrate we will allow by the decisions we make and what we stand for. But it's also how we go about doing the work, And again, if I was trying to pull out a soccer example, a football example, I haven't worked with Mikel Arteta. I've never worked with Arsenal. I don't know anybody there. But I look at what he has done and the results he's gaining, and the decisions I know he has made, because there are some quite, public decisions that he made that were risky from a results point of view.
Okay.
And it's very clear to me he's drawn some lines about, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, how it's going to be around here, what we're going to be like, and then how we're going to go about doing the work, how we're going to go about training, how we go about playing. So for me, all of those things together combine to be culture.
I love that. I'll just reflect back to what I'm hearing there. Culture is how we be around here. It's showing up. It's how we show up for everyone every day. It's demonstration through our decisions and our actions. It's what we allow. It's doing the work. How much of this is in your new book, The Alignment Advantage? Is culture involved there? Or is it just purely, leadership and culture seem to go hand in hand? Do you talk about culture a lot?
No, it's integral and for me, fascinating. So culture, what I'm not saying is culture is the most important thing.
Okay.
It's a bit of a distinction,
okay,
but it is a pivot. So the crux of what's become at the heart of the work we've done over the last 5 years is a link between three things: strategy and the strategic goals. And from a sports environment, that might just be absolutely what we want to achieve and deliver. It might be the number of points we want to achieve. It might be the league position or what we want to win. But everything that I would class as the strategic goals, the key deliverable.
Okay.
The link between that and the culture. And then the link between culture and what we call the X. Now, if I give you the roundest description of what we mean by the X is the customer or external experience plus brand in its purest essence. So I'll kind of bring that into the sports world in just a moment. Yeah. But where it differs from pretty much anything else I've ever seen is in most environments, culture and strategic goals, the deliverables, are almost set at odds with each other. It's like, this is the most important thing by far. We've got to, we're a results business, so we've just got to achieve this. And culture's the soft, fluffy stuff that comes along afterwards. Or increasingly over the past 10 years, there's lots being around. We've all got to be really purpose-driven. We've all got to really understand what our why is. And then the culture will somehow, out of the culture will come what we want to achieve. And I don't think it's either of those things. I think culture has to be a strategic enabler. So we have to develop a culture that's set up specifically to achieve what we want to achieve. And if the culture isn't an enabler of the results, it will be a blocker of the results. So I'll just use a really easy example because you presented it to me. And again, I'm not massively behind the scenes with Newcastle. I'm not working with them, but I just happen to know a bit about it because I know one or two people, and I'm a fan, if you like. But I look at what Eddie Howe, the head coach at Newcastle United, has done culturally within the club and with the players, and that is the primary reason why they are overperforming to the results that they have. I'm in no doubt about that. If you look at the quality of the squad, and there's some amazing players there, don't get me wrong, but they have definitely overachieved this year. So he's set out to say we need to achieve things, and this is the culture that I want to bring in order to achieve those results. So that link is fascinating for me. And it isn't talked about as a coupling anywhere near enough.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I want to dwell on this because I think this is fascinating, this fusion between strategic goals and culture, because absolutely what resonates with me is this notion of, we set about these outcome goals. So in English soccer, English football, soccer football around the world where there's relegation and promotion, it might be we want to get promoted, or we want to avoid relegation, or we want to get into Europe if you're a Premier League team or something like that. We want to have 90 points. Whatever it is, we want to win the championship. So there's that outcome objective, that strategic objective. And there's this word, culture, that everybody is so enthused about. And I don't think there's anybody out there who would necessarily deny its importance. But there seems to be a gap between, we set this big, I've heard it before as this big, hairy, audacious goal. Okay, and that book good to great. Okay, so we set this goal of 90 points, but then it's like, as you described, this light, fluffy cultural stuff, which we know it's not light and fluffy, it's hardcore, if anything. So it sounds like the fusion is, you're promoting this notion of it's hardcore. I've written before about psychology isn't light and fluffy, it's hardcore. It's hardcore. So can you dig down a bit more on that, and it might be that you borrow from your lens of Newcastle, for instance. I mean, what are you seeing that Eddie Howe is doing with relation to the culture that really promotes the strategic goal? You might not borrow from Eddie, you might borrow from Mikel Arteta, or from any of your experiences, or just give us in concrete terms, what do you mean here? What is hardcore about culture? How can we link it with strategic goals?
Well, let me. The first thing to keep in mind, again, it's quite small and anecdotal, but Newcastle United signed a spent quite a considerable amount of money on a player recently called Anthony Gordon, who again I don't know well. I don't know
Yep.
I don't know behind the scenes, but he then didn't go straight into the starting lineup, even though there are players who have played a lot of games, probably more games than they should have done. And I don't want to misquote Eddie Howe, but he said something along the lines of, it's not that he's not fit, he's just not fit for the way that I want to play.
Okay.
And so very clearly there is part of that culture which is about unreasonably high standards. Mm-hmm. And I've heard Eddie talk on other podcasts about the standards that he sets for himself and the standards that he sets for others. And there's an example. If we want to achieve things, if we want to shift the dial in our performance considerably, which he has and they have at Newcastle, that means there is an ask of us as a group of players and individually to demand more of ourselves and of each other than has been the standard in the past. I think that's one kind of example. If I look at England, and again, without being behind the scenes, it's not that long ago that England's soccer team had the golden generation. We probably, I think, had individually a better group of a better set of individuals than even we have now. Yet there was something not quite there in terms of the connection and the culture, and if you like, the joint psychology of the team.
Yep.
I don't know if that's quite the right phrase, but whereas I think what Gareth Southgate and his team did very early on was draw some lines as to, this is what it's going to be like to be part of the England team.
Yep.
And this is what's okay, this is what's not okay, and I'm going to run it the way that I want to run it. And if you don't like it, I'll leave. I don't think that was message that was put quite like there, but I think it's quite clear to me. So, and that's enabled the success, the step up in the performance of the England team. So, that, and again, I mentioned Russell Martin earlier on. Russell plays in a very specific way. Mm-hmm. Russell's, if you like, performance goals are a little different than other coaches. Okay. Now, that's not to say that promotion might not have been on his list this year, or playoffs may not have been on his list this year, but possession is incredibly important to Russ. When he was at MK Dons, which is a League One club in England, they had, I think, the third best possession stats in Europe. So philosophically, he wants to play in a way. And in order to have that extreme of performance, then the process behind the scenes and the culture that supports that has got to be crystal clear and unequivocal. And that's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to play for somebody like Russ. But the guys who do play for him and enjoy playing for him absolutely love him, love the setup, love the environment, love the philosophy, love the culture.
Fascinating stuff. And, obviously, we're talking a lot about football, soccer here. We have both of our work is heavily in that sport, and we have that in common. And I know there's lots of coaches listening in from lots of different sports, and obviously all of this applies to any organization and team. And listening to you talk about England football, and disclaimer for myself here, I've not been involved at all, but Dr. Pippa Grange, who was Gareth Southgate's first sports psychologist, has been on the show talking about culture and environment, and Dr. Ian Mitchell, who succeeded Pippa, has done an incredible job with Gareth Southgate, and drawing on some of the things you said, linking strategic goals with culture. My understanding there, and it's a distant understanding, strategic goals being, well, we'd love to certainly get to the World Cup and the Euros and get far and hopefully win, and they've done a great job in the last 6 or 7 years. Gareth Southgate has probably had the best results consistently than any other England manager, and I know psychology has been a big part of it, and the culture, and I do believe several factors here is the culture. Is the players weren't necessarily historically, anecdotally, the players were saying, well, we weren't looking forward to coming to England. And I remember Stephen Gerrard talking on record here. You can go on YouTube and actually watch this. And this is a social identity piece here. He would say, I'd watch all my mates at Liverpool go off to the Argentina squad, the Brazil squad, the French squad, the Italian squad, Spain squad, and they'd love getting together with their mates. But he said in England we didn't necessarily have that. Obviously, because of the domestic rivalry between United and Liverpool and Arsenal, etc., Chelsea. But what Gareth Southgate seems to have done, ably assisted by everybody around him, including the Sykes, has been, changing that culture, linking culture with strategic goals. But it feels like that requires a lot of leadership, skill, insight, foresight, developing the right kind of processes, putting the right processes and practices in place as a leader. I'd love to hear you speak potentially to a few of those things that leaders might consider, that no doubt you've written in your book, The Alignment Advantage, when it comes to strategic goals, culture, fusing the two together, and any kind of leadership strategies that spring to mind here.
Okay. So our starting point when we do this piece of work is normally 6 questions. And actually, let me give the punchline before I give the questions. In more than 95% of organizations that we ask these 6 questions, the most senior teams in those organizations don't give the same answers as each other.
Right.
So if I just transport you to the corporate world for a moment, if you imagine being on the board of a multi-billion-pound organization and sitting with your fellow executives and being asked 6 questions around culture, strategy, culture, and the experience you want to create for your customers or your guests or your visitors, your paid punters of whatever type, and realizing that when you're talking about those things, not everyone around that board table are talking about the same thing. When we talk about culture, we're not necessarily talking about the same thing. When we talk about strategy, we're not talking about the same thing. And when I've done this in a sporting environment, I'm finding very similar results.
Okay.
So we ask, what is strategy? And I think that's really vital, because I know there'll be lots of people who are listening to this who are part of having to draw up the whether it's called a strategy or not, the program for a sports academy or a program for an athletics academy. We could substitute that strategy question for program, but my language is strategy. So what is strategy? What is your overall key strategic objective? What is the overall objective that we are trying to achieve for this organization, this team, this academy, this group? What is culture? Question number 4 for me is possibly my favorite. On a scale of 1 to 6, to what degree does the current culture help us in the delivery of our strategic goals? Mm-hmm. What is the service experience distinction? That might be less relevant for lots of people listening to this. But then the 6th is what is the experience that we are looking to create for our stakeholders? Right. So we ask those 6 questions, and then before we get into what is my definition of strategy or my definition of culture, we say, right, around this table as a leadership group, to what degree have we the same answers as each other? And to me, when we talk about the leadership tools to enable culture to deliver strategy, what we have to start with is, are we even talking about the same thing? Mm-hmm. And it fascinates me how often in all sorts of different environments do we very quickly realize that actually we're not even really pointing for the same thing. We might think we are, but when we're actually not quite, we haven't got those goals totally aligned amongst us. So if we were let's say we were the leadership, the sporting leadership team in a particular sports club, all the psych sit down, all of the fitness staff sit down, all of the the actual management coaching staff sit down and answer these kind of questions, at least 5 out of those 6, and make sure that at least we're talking about the same thing. And then we can delve down into that question number 4 I mentioned. How sure are we that the culture we've got is serving the goals that we're heading for? And if the answer to that 1 to 6 question is 4 or less, then we've got to do some culture work, otherwise we're not giving ourselves the best chance. And then if I just go to the back end of the framework, because I know I didn't touch on it so much earlier on, I believe that our end user experience can't outperform the employee experience for any prolonged period of time. So the external experience we create, whether it's for the families of the kids who are going through this academy, whether it's for the fans who are coming through the gates to watch us, whether it's for our sponsors, the external experience that we create cannot outperform the culture for any prolonged period of time. They can't be different from each other. In the corporate world, we say that our customer experience can't outperform our employee experience for any prolonged period of time. So not only do we have to shape the culture to deliver the kind of goals that we want, but we've also got to shape the culture to deliver the brand of football we want, or the way we want to play. Again, I go back to Last Chance U because I found it fascinating. Not that I thought it was all amazing the way it was coached, but there's a basketball program for these talented kids, but coming from the most challenging communities in the east of Los Angeles. And you have a program where it's very clear, although it's not stated like this, it's very clear the culture that the head coach is trying to build because of what they're trying to achieve with the raw materials they're trying to achieve it with. And then as a result of that, the brand of basketball they're going to play, they can only play one brand of basketball really because of what they're working with, So that would be the starting point from a leadership perspective. Are we clear and aligned on what we're trying to achieve, the culture we need in order to achieve that? And then, whether it's the brand of game that we're trying to play, or whether it's the impact that we want to have on our fans, supporters, and users.
This is interesting. A few things I've written down here. Alignment, another word could be coherence. The psychological term is probably shared mental model. Around your 6 questions, but especially strategically, what are we trying to achieve here? Our strategic goals. What is our strategy to do that? And checking and testing whether we are aligned, we have a shared mental model, and then listening to what you're saying. It almost feels the next most important thing is making sure that our people, if we want our customers to have a great experience, we've got to make sure our people have, our coaches in an academy, our employees, our back of office staff, if you like, if we're talking about a sporting organisation, what experiences are they having? And it's making sure culturally they're having the best possible experiences that we can provide for them in order then to not only achieve our strategical goals, but also give our customers, if you like, and that could be the fans, the best possible experiences in an academy. That might be the family, if you like, and I suppose the players. So it's our people that are so important.
Yeah, and if I hope this is not the case anymore, or it's much more diminishing. But when I first started being around football from a kind of psychological viewpoint, it was almost kind of not peripheral, but hidden in the shadows, And let's say there is a sporting club now that still uses their psychologists in the background as opposed to an integral part. And I know hopefully that's very rare now. But then you can't, for example, create a culture where we're all in it together, and it's all in it together, except for the psychologists and the masseurs, And I've seen that. I've got a picture of a football club where that was absolutely the case, And the moment that you start doing that, then there's a fragmentation when it comes to performance, And those people who are coming through the gates to watch, for example, will feel that. So you're right, and just to go back to the shared mental model, really, that is exactly what I'm getting at. And so this could even be drilled down to, an individual performer. It's not, I very rarely do individual sports, but certainly if we were talking about a high level individual performer, it's still the same essence. Does everybody around that person and that person themselves, are they crystal clear on what we're really trying to achieve? And is the whole culture around them right to deliver that? And then how does that impact on those people who might be supporting them from a sponsorship point of view, or their family point of view? Are all of those things aligned, and has everyone got a clear shared mental model about it? It's so critical.
I agree with you, and I think that notion of shared mental model, alignment, coherence across key staff, key stakeholders, across the whole staff, for example, hopefully that's worth the value of the book in and of itself, and the value of listening into this podcast. I also know that there's people listening in who, you have me at hello here, but I know there's coaches listening in who, would say that's great, that's fantastic. And I don't disagree with what you're saying, Richard, but hey, man, I'm still wrestling with my 4-3-3s and my 4-5-2s, whatever. Don't think my maths is very good there. I think there's too many players. But I'm passionate about positionism in soccer versus relationism and these kind of things that are now doing the rounds on Twitter, which are absolutely fascinating around the tech-tac, the X's and the O's, which coaches are becoming very accomplished there, geometrically on the pitch, the courts and so on and so forth. And they're kind of saying, yeah, but that's so important. And I don't know how much time I have here to dedicate to the nuances. Yeah, people are important to me, but this, the nuances here, the granular detail, I don't necessarily have the time. Richard, what might you say to that? And really, can you unpack any kind of ideas that you've got for people around what processes they can put in place, culturally, linking culture and strategy, and just general culture stuff?
Yeah, and I totally appreciate it. The last League Managers Association session I did was creating high performance culture. And there was a guy in the room, former Premier League footballer, has been a manager, head coach lower down the leagues. And he was saying, this is all very well and good, but, I go into a club and I've probably got 9 or 10 games to get the results. And if I'm not, I'm fired. So what's the point in creating a culture, So, and I get it, because I can't argue with that, because that is the case. My kind of, however, my hand is, let's see, you get those 10 results by just, kicking everybody, however you get those 10 results, then what? If there isn't a plan to build a culture, then you're just then in the next run of 10 games to save your job. And
well, can I interject just briefly, because you've jogged my memory here, and I won't name which Netflix documentary this is, but it was a Netflix documentary, really good one that I watched, where a manager went in and very much emphasized culture, at least, and let's face it, documentaries are snapshots of snapshots of snapshots, aren't they? So we don't fully get the whole truth. So let's just go on the basis of what I'm saying here. Really emphasized culture. Actually ended up losing his job. I don't know whether it was after about 20 games or so. And the feeling I got, and I'd be interested to get your response here, was actually if he had gone in and actually held back a little bit on, this is about getting the culture, because he did what you mentioned Arteta did, which was having to make some tough decisions, I believe, around various players that potentially had to leave the club. So he made those decisions, and actually as a consequence, the performances possibly suffered, because whereas maybe a player engaged in the kind of behaviours that he didn't want to see, this manager, that player scored goals.
Yeah.
So there's that juxtaposition there. And you just triggered me there. So even in your passion for culture, can that still be trumped by, the reality is, especially in football, soccer, that landscape, sometimes you've got to go and get the results, and you've got to go with what you've got at that time before culture, if you like.
Yes. There's a short term and I think the culture planning starts on day one.
Okay.
The culture planning starts on day one.
Yeah.
And the understanding of this is what we're trying to achieve now. This is what we want to achieve, next season or in the next cycle of, whatever the sport is. Okay. And we're not going to go from culture A to culture B overnight.
Yeah.
And part of that transition, for example, and this is one of the things I was talking about on the LMA program, probably depends on your kind of standing and reputation.
Yep.
If you're Sean Dyche going in Everton, if he did even ever say this, but you can go in and say no snoods, no tracks or bottoms, and people go, "Oh, Sean Dyche will do it." But if you're Ryan Mason being the co-manager of Tottenham Hotspur at the minute, you probably can't say that kind of thing. You've got a little bit of it. So I'm very conscious of that. Short term versus long term. But I still want the lead coach, head coach, director of performance, whatever it is, from the very beginning. Like, how have you got the job? If you've got the job based on all I'm going to do is squeeze every bit of effort out of every player that I've got, and I'll put up with anything as long as we stay up, then don't bother doing any culture stuff. Just keep doing that. Mind it's creating a culture in itself. But the chances are a manager has gone in, or a head coach, again, whatever, director of performance, whatever it might be, on the basis that I can create something. And I say, again, I'll give you a quick example. Then I'll give people some practical things to think about. I met, and I'm only going to dance around this because I don't think it's quite fair to name him, but I met on a League Managers Association program, a very eminent Premier League manager, and he arrived on the program again. We were focusing on culture, and as part of it, I was talking about the importance of vision and why I think vision is really useful in creating a culture. And he grumbled and groaned for hours through it, and in the end, he said a very similar thing. Average tenure for a manager in the Championship is about 10 months. So what's the point? And after being challenged, he had been at that point at 2 Premier League clubs and a third club in another top division in another major league. And he'd been successful at one and less successful at the other two. I said, hey, just out of interest, when you were at Club A, did you have anything that was beyond just the performance goals? Did you have anything which was like, hey, this is what we want to create? And he said, oh, yeah, we did. And I said, okay, so you did that. At Club B, did you do that? No. At Club C, did you do that? No. And I was like, oh, maybe, maybe there's something in it. So we don't have to revolutionize the culture on day one. However, the more we put up with things that we don't think are right, then the quicker we're going to damage the performance. And that goes back to that link between, it's not, and I say this in the corporate world a lot, I'll say this in sports world, it's not about creating a nice culture necessarily. I'm not interested really in having a nice place to work or a nice dressing room. That's not my first port of call. I'm saying, what do we need this culture to be like to achieve what we want to achieve? And that will be different for England, different for Spain, different for Scotland, different if we're in the top division to the second division, different to if we are, I did some work with the guys who are the management team at Accrington Stanley, John Coleman, sorry, I've just got it.
That was 30,000 feet still climbing, wasn't it?
You're gonna have to reference.
I don't think our American audience, but there was a famous advert, wasn't there?
Yes.
On English TV. I'll look that up on YouTube.
If you don't drink lots of milk, you'll only be good enough to play for Accrington Stanley. And the other little child said, "Who are they?" Exactly. Yeah. But they, as a football club, they overperform on their resources. and they are getting, players in on very little money who've probably not fared well at one club and somebody else who's been injured somewhere else, and they overperform, and they create a very specific type of culture to enable that. So I would start things day one, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that I would, chuck out the troublesome member of this staff on day one. Let me give you a couple of takeaways. If people are thinking about this, if they're thinking about how do I do this on a tight time scale with not a lot of resource, and I'm more interested in my X's and my O's. So one thing is just to be really obvious again. The starting point when you think about creating a culture is what is it that we're trying to achieve here? And I believe it's different if we're trying to stay up, not get relegated, not finish bottom of the pile, versus if we want to, be world champions.
Yeah.
So the starting point of culture is what we're trying to achieve. And then be really crystal clear then, how do we need it to be around here in order to achieve that? And if we just start with that, then you can do that at any level. I help out with my son's under 14 football team. And we essentially did that as a management team. And then we fed stuff into the boys that would help create that culture. And we engaged the parents in it. And frankly, a parent and therefore their child left the team because what we were trying to create as a culture to achieve what we wanted to achieve wasn't in line with their mental model, which is cool. And they went to a different club, which was more in line with their mental model. It's cool.
Yeah, I know you want to go on and introduce some practical ideas, but I want to reflect back what I've heard, because I just think this is fascinating. I mean, rewinding back, I almost heard a periodization piece here to my previous question, which we think of periodization from a tactical perspective or a physical perspective, but almost like a cultural periodization. If you're going in, well, what is the situation here? How can I manage this situation? And where does culture fit in? And sometimes it might be putting it off, or it's actually making your specific challenge in that moment, a part of the culture, which is, I can't make everybody happy right now, and I've just got to introduce this game model as quick as I possibly can to get some points. Okay, but what you're saying, which I love, is that notion of a kind of a periodized flexibility and adaptability. Okay, over the coming months, should I have the wonderful opportunity to go beyond 10 games, which tends to be the landscape, then I can start introducing some more people, processes and practices here. And then I think the other thing I'm hearing, and I almost link this to a previous episode on the Sports Site show around professional judgment and decision making. Dr. Mike Ashford, Dr. Lowell Collins came and spoke to us about PJDM, professional judgment and decision making, and that it's really understanding your context. What context am I in, and what's important here, essentially? Who am I coaching? What do I want to coach? How am I going to do that? And why am I doing it in this way? And then broadening that out from a cultural perspective. Those are the kind of little things I'm hearing.
Absolutely. You've described it beautifully. And then at that point, I think one of the interesting things that I've discovered over the years is that when it comes to culture, big bang launches don't work. And in fact, big bang launches can often get in the way. And there's a lovely piece of research, a lovely model that's been around. I think it was originally done in the marketing world in about the 50s, but it's been retested and retested and retested, and it's called the law of diffusion of innovation.
Wow, that's a name.
And what it tells us is, if you have a group of people in most environments, you will have a small group of people, probably about 3 to 5%, who are your early adopters. They're the people who want to go with new things because they're new things. Then you'll have a group of people, which is I think the official stat is about 13%, who you've got your innovators, your first kind of 3 to 5%. Then you've got your early adopters, Your early adopters are the ones that'll jump on that new idea. They'll be the one who buys the new iPhone when it comes out because it's a new iPhone, and that's what I do. Then the next 70% is made up of 35%. You've got your early majority and your late majority. But they won't adopt something until that first kind of 16, 18, 20% have gone first. And then you've got this group of people at the end. I think if I'm sure the listeners will look at law of diffusion of innovation. They'll find, I think it's about the last 7% are what's called the laggards. They're the people who are, as we do this now in 2023, they're the people who are still using old rotary landlines, because they'll never come along. Now, if we apply that to culture change, which we've done for years in all different environments, then the job then, if we want to shift the culture over a period of time, is to find out who's in that 20%. And we engage them first. We don't try and get everybody bought into the new culture at the same time. So one of the things that people can be doing while everything else is going on, and when they start to think about, hey, what do I want the culture to be to achieve what we want to achieve, is not then go, hey, how do I launch it? Not even, hey, how do I come up with a set of values or a vision or whatever? But hey, who are the people out there that if we're going to make some changes, who are the people in the squad? Who are the people in the staff who will buy into this with me, perhaps develop it with me? And we get to the point, I say this again, especially in corporate organizations, because corporates typically do big bang launches for everything, but especially culture. What you really want, when you go, ta-da, this is the new culture, that people should go, is that it? That's not, because it's already alive before you launch it. There should be a slight tinge of disappointment, if not disappointment, a slight anticlimax. Because if you do it the opposite way, where we do a big bang launch before we've got at least some people involved, people immediately resist. The last head coach came in and they were going to have a new culture, and it died really quickly the moment it was challenged. People have seen that over and again. So thinking about who's in that initial kind of 15 to 20%. And the cool thing is they could be players, they can be the psychs, they will probably almost definitely be the psychs, they can be, they don't have to be, if you've got a kit man who'll buy into it, that's awesome, or, it can be the vocal person. But I think that's something really useful and really practical that people can go in and go, hey, if I was going to shift the culture a bit, who would be in the 20% of people who I could engage with to come on the journey?
I'll tell you where that really resonates with me, Richard, is actually as a sports psychologist entering an organisation. One of the conversations I have with whoever's bringing me in, it tends to be that kind of conversation. If I'm speaking to mental skills, for example, who are our low-hanging fruit here? Who is going to go, yeah, I love this, brilliant, let's work? Because especially in the world of mental skills, that there are going to be some players, competitors, participants who, either feel like, hey, I've got this covered, man, I'm good here, or they don't. And I haven't had positive experiences of it, and so don't necessarily buy in, or whatever the reason. So where's our low-hanging fruit? And you always look for that, and then you let it grow, both organically and deliberately. So that really resonates with me. Hey, look, let's finish on a high note here. I mean, I don't believe we've necessarily got onto the practical stuff that you've given us lots of practical stuff, but I'm sure there's some more stuff that you'd like to speak to, that we said we were going to speak to, or go anywhere you'd like to in terms of your book here, The Alignment Advantage. What treats are in store for those who turn that first page? What things we've spoken to, a lot of the kind of things that we'd learn, but what else is in there that they can learn?
Oh yeah, thanks for asking that. Yeah, so each of the areas I've touched on here, and it's written. Look, it's written for a business audience. So those people who are listening to this who are dual up and they're coaches and they've got jobs as well, then it's great. If you're in charge of an academy or a football club, it's great. But as well as describing how to build strategies and sharing our model for culture change. And also there's some brilliant stuff about branding then, what brand really is and what brand isn't, and how to build a guest experience culture. I've also got some interviews from really people I find really fascinating. So one of the interviews is with a lady called Emma Woods, who was the CEO of Wagamama, the chain of big restaurant chain, and she navigated Wagamama through the whole COVID period, and she's now a chair and a non-exec director of various organisations, including Huel. So her insights are fascinating. Dr. Sue Bridgewater, who I mentioned earlier on, who is a professor at Liverpool University, in particular around sport. The guy who's the VP of operations for the viewing platform at the top of the Empire State Building is one of the interviews. And it's fascinating. And from all of these people, there are lessons about culture and leadership and engagement that I think are applicable in any environment, whether it's sport, business, or life. One of the interviews is with a guy who is a life coach, really quite controversial, quite edgy, but he's got this beautiful goal setting process, which was a take on it that I'd never quite come across before and that I've used since to great success. So there's, it's positioned as a business book, but there really is something in there for everybody who's got an interest in achieving goals, building strategies, making a difference for customers, guests, end users, supporters. I think there'll be something in for everyone.
Which brings us full circle back to those in sport love to learn from business as much as business loves to learn from sport. So it's a book for everybody involved in sport. Richard, that's been absolutely thought-provoking as always. Your book again, The Alignment Advantage. How can people get hold of it? I'm assuming the usual channels, but do let us know here. And also, how can people find you, follow you, and if you'd like to be contacted, contact you?
Yeah, it's as we speak now, it's available on pre-order on Amazon. It's out in the UK on the 3rd of June, and I just found out this morning, published in the US and Canada on the 27th of June. So get pre-orders in now. You can find me on www.twentyoneleadership.com. That's 21 in words. And I'm on social media at Richard Nugent on Twitter and LinkedIn. Anyone can feel free to get in touch. After the last time I was on, I had some lovely questions from people about leadership and culture, and I think I managed to get back to everyone. So if anyone's got any questions, they are welcome to get in touch.
Well, hopefully we'll fill your inbox there with some questions. Richard, can't thank you enough. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me, Dan.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. I'd be delighted to hear any suggestions you have. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.